Waking up with a fasting glucose of 115 does not feel like a problem. And that is exactly why so many people ignore it for months or even years, without realizing that their body is already moving in a direction. That becomes much harder to reverse later, because this number sits in a dangerous gray zone where nothing feels urgent, but everything is already changing internally. Most people look at 115 and think it is close enough to normal, especially because it is still below the official diabetes threshold. And that creates a false sense of safety that delays action at the exact moment when the body is giving one of its earliest and most important warning signals. Spork. What makes this even more confusing is that many people who wake up at 115 fasting glucose also wake up tired without energy, sometimes even feeling mentally slow in the morning, but they rarely connect that feeling with what is happening to their blood sugar before breakfast, even though both are part of the same underlying process. Before we go deeper, if you've ever looked at your morning blood sugar and felt unsure about what it really means, or if you wake up tired and suspect your fasting glucose may be higher than it should be, subscribe now, because this channel focuses specifically on morning blood sugar, fasting glucose patterns, and what your body is doing while you sleep. That affects how you feel when you wake up. To understand whether 115 fasting glucose is already pre-diabetes, you need to stop looking at the number as an isolated measurement and start seeing it as the result of a process that has been building silently over time, especially during the night when your body is supposed to be recovering, but is often doing the opposite. When you measure your glucose in the morning before eating anything, you are not just measuring your diet, and this is one of the biggest misconceptions that keeps people stuck, because morning blood sugar is heavily influenced by what your liver is doing while you sleep, how your hormones are behaving, and how sensitive your cells are to insulin at that moment. During the night, your body is constantly regulating energy, and your liver plays a central role in this by releasing glucose into your bloodstream to make sure your brain and vital organs have enough fuel even when you are not eating. And this process becomes more intense in the early morning hours as your body prepares you to wake up. This natural increase in glucose before waking is driven by hormonal signals, especially cortisol, which rises in the early morning to help you feel alert and ready for the day. But when your system is balanced, this increase is controlled, and your insulin response keeps your blood sugar within a healthy range. However, when insulin sensitivity begins to decline, even slightly, the same normal hormonal signals can lead to higher than expected morning blood sugar. And that is when numbers like 110, 112, 115 start to appear consistently, without an obvious explanation. At this stage, your body is not completely broken, but it is no longer working efficiently. And that is why 115 fasting glucose should not be ignored, because it often represents the transition point where the system is starting to lose control but has not yet crossed into a full diagnosis. One of the most important things to understand is that prediabetes is not something that suddenly appears overnight, but rather a gradual progression that can begin long before numbers reach 126. And in many cases, people spend years waking up with fasting glucose between 110 and 120, without realizing that they are already in the early stages of metabolic dysfunction. 2. What makes this progression dangerous is not just the number itself, but the pattern, because if you are consistently waking up at 115, it means your body is repeating the same process every single night, reinforcing the same hormonal and metabolic responses that slowly push your glucose higher over time. This is why looking at a single reading is not enough, and instead you need to observe trends. Because a stable pattern at 115 is very different from an occasional spike, and it is the stable pattern that signals something deeper is happening. Another factor that often goes unnoticed is the role of sleep quality, because even if you believe you are sleeping enough hours, fragmented sleep stress during the night or subtle hormonal imbalances can keep your cortisol levels elevated for longer than they should be, which directly impacts how much glucose your liver releases before you wake up. When cortisol stays elevated, your body remains in a semi-alert state, even during sleep. And this not only affects your recovery, but also increases glucose production, making it more likely that you will wake up with higher fasting levels and still feel tired at the same time. This combination of high morning blood sugar and low morning energy is one of the clearest signs that something is not working properly beneath the surface. This There is also a common mistake that many people make at this stage, which is focusing only on reducing sugar intake during the day, while completely ignoring what happens at night, even though the night is when a large part of the problem is being created. Misunderstanding keeps many people stuck in the same cycle, because they are trying to fix what they see during the day, while the real imbalance is being reinforced while they sleep. You can eat perfectly during the day and still wake up with 115 if your liver is overproducing glucose and your insulin response is not strong enough to manage it. Which is why understanding the nighttime mechanisms becomes essential if you want to change your morning numbers. Because your body is not inactive at night, it is actively regulating hormones, energy, and glucose levels in a way that directly shapes how you wake up. This pattern continues. The progression tends to follow a very predictable path, where 115 slowly becomes 118, then 120, then 125, and eventually crosses into 126 or higher, at which point it is officially classified as diabetes. 2. Even though the underlying process has been developing long before that threshold was reached, often silently and without obvious warning signs that most people would recognize. The reason this progression feels slow is because it often happens in small increments that are easy to ignore, but those small increments represent a continuous loss of metabolic control that becomes harder to reverse as time passes. And what makes this even more dangerous is that the body gradually adapts to these higher numbers, making them feel normal even when they are not. So, is 115 fasting glucose already pre-diabetes? From a strict clinical definition, it falls within the pre-diabetes range. But what matters more than the label is what the number represents in your body. Big, because it indicates that your system is already under stress and beginning to lose efficiency in controlling blood sugar. Especially during the night, when these patterns are being repeated over and over again. And if you are also experiencing symptoms like waking up tired, low energy in the morning, or difficulty concentrating early in the day, those signals reinforce the idea that your morning blood sugar is not where it should be, and that your body is already struggling. To maintain balance in a way that may not yet be obvious in more visible symptoms, the good news is that this stage is also where the most effective changes can happen, because your body is still responsive and small adjustments in behavior, especially those that affect your nighttime physiology, can have a significant impact on your morning glucose levels. And over time, those small adjustments can begin to shift the pattern in a more stable and controlled direction. Simple factors, like how your body transitions into sleep, how consistent your routine is, and how your stress levels are managed in the evening, can influence how much glucose your liver releases before morning. And this is why focusing on the night becomes just as important as what you do during the day. But the first step is awareness, because as long as 115 feels safe, nothing changes, and the pattern continues. And this is exactly why understanding your numbers early gives you an advantage that many people only realize much later. What you need to take away from this is simple, but powerful. Morning blood sugar is not random, and it is not only about what you eat, but about what your body is doing while you sleep. And numbers like 115 are early signals that something in that process needs attention, especially when they appear consistently. This video helped you understand your fasting glucose in a way that you hadn't considered before. And if you want to keep learning how to improve your morning blood sugar, reduce fasting glucose, and stop waking up tired with high blood sugar before breakfast, subscribe to the channel and stay consistent with this information. Because the moment you understand what your morning blood sugar is telling you, you stop reacting to the number and start changing the pattern behind it.